September 1st, 1939. German forces cross the Polish border before dawn. Within hours, Europe is at war. By the time the fighting ends 6 years later, more than 70 million people are dead, entire cities have been erased, and the most destructive conflict in human history has rewritten the map of the world forever. We know the broad story of World War II. We know the invasions, the dictators, the alliances, the surrender ceremonies. We know how the war ended. But buried beneath the official history is something far stranger. Because even after 80 years of investigations, declassified archives, forensic studies, and international searches, some of the war's biggest questions still have no answer. Not guesses, not theories, answers. A priceless treasure chamber stolen by the Nazis vanishes without a trace. An entire flight of military aircraft disappears into the Pacific and is never seen again. Hitler's final hours remain clouded by contradictory testimony and missing evidence. A Nazi nuclear program operating deep inside occupied Norway raises fears that Germany may have come far closer to an atomic weapon than anyone realized at the time. And then there are the decisions that make even experienced historians stop and ask, why? Why did German forces suddenly halt outside Dunkirk, allowing more than 300,000 Allied soldiers to escape? Who betrayed Anne Frank's hiding place? What happened to the missing gold, documents, and art looted across Europe during the collapse of the Third Reich? And why do some wartime files remain sealed, fragmented, or missing altogether to this day? These are not internet myths or late-night conspiracy stories. They are real historical mysteries, built on missing records, conflicting eyewitness accounts, unexplained military actions, and evidence that simply disappears at the worst possible moment. In some cases, governments spent decades trying to solve them. In others, the truth may have died with the last witnesses. Tonight, we uncover 12 of the biggest unsolved mysteries of World War II. Cases involving vanished treasure, secret weapons programs, unexplained disappearances, covert operations, and wartime decisions so baffling that historians are still debating them generations later. Because World War II did not leave behind only ruins and graves. It also left behind secrets. May 24th, 1940. The German Wehrmacht has encircled more than 300,000 Allied soldiers on the beaches of Dunkirk, France. They are trapped. The sea is behind them. The enemy is in front. By every military calculation available, they should have been annihilated. They were not. On that same day, Adolf Hitler issued what would become one of the most debated orders of the entire war. He halted his armored divisions. The panzers, which had driven to within striking distance of the beaches, were ordered to stop. They remained stopped for nearly 3 days, long enough for the British Navy and an armada of civilian vessels to evacuate the bulk of the Allied force across the English Channel. Operation Dynamo, the evacuation, rescued approximately 338,000 men. Those men would go on to form the backbone of Allied armies that fought in North Africa, Italy, and eventually Normandy. Without Dunkirk, the British Army, as a fighting force, may have been crippled beyond effective offensive recovery. The question that has never been fully resolved is this: why did Hitler stop? The German commander on the ground, General Ewald von Kleist, later said he received the halt order with disbelief. His tanks were ready. The beach was within reach. A decisive blow would have delivered Britain's entire army into German captivity. Von Kleist called the order incomprehensible. Several explanations have been proposed across the decades. One holds that Hitler deferred to Hermann Göring, who promised the Luftwaffe could destroy the evacuation from the air alone, a promise the Air Force was utterly unable to keep. Another theory suggests that General Gerd von Rundstedt, commanding Army Group A, recommended caution because his armored columns were overextended and vulnerable to counterattack. Hitler, the theory goes, simply agreed. But there is a third interpretation, more speculative, more unsettling. Some historians have argued that Hitler deliberately allowed the British to escape, that he believed Britain could be brought into a negotiated peace if its army were preserved rather than humiliated, that the halt order was, in fact, a calculated signal to London. We are not your enemies. We can still come to terms. If that is true, it is one of the most consequential strategic miscalculations in modern history. Britain did not come to terms. It continued the war, and the men rescued from Dunkirk eventually returned to France on June 6, 1944. Documents from Hitler's headquarters have been studied exhaustively. They confirm the order was given. They do not explain the reasoning behind it with any clarity. Hitler's own statements on the subject were contradictory. He cited different justifications at different times, suggesting either confusion or deliberate obfuscation. The men on the beaches of Dunkirk did not know or care why the tanks had stopped. They were simply grateful. But 80 years later, the question remains open, and historians continue to argue. Was it military miscalculation, strategic diplomacy, personal indecision? The evidence supports all three and resolves none of them. What is certain is this: the halt order changed the war. Everything that followed, the Battle of Britain, the liberation of Europe, the Allied victory, flowed in part from those 3 days when the panzers did not move. And we still do not know why. The Amber Room was not merely beautiful. It was, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary objects ever created by human hands. Constructed in the early 18th century for the Prussian royal family, it was later presented to Peter the Great of Russia as a diplomatic gift. Over the following decades, Russian craftsmen expanded and refined it until it covered the walls of an entire chamber in the Catherine Palace outside St. Petersburg. 6 tons of amber panels, backed with gold leaf and mirrors, stretched across more than 55 square meters of wall space. Gemstones were embedded throughout. When candlelight struck its surface, the room glowed like the interior of a sun. It was called the 8th Wonder of the World. In September 1941, German forces captured the Catherine Palace. A specialized Nazi unit, the Kunstschutz, tasked with the organized looting of European art, dismantled the Amber Room in 36 hours. The panels were crated and shipped west to Königsberg, in what is now the Russian city of Kaliningrad. They were installed in Königsberg Castle, where they were seen by visitors as late as 1943. Then the Allied bombing began, and the Amber Room disappeared. What happened next is where the mystery begins, and where it refuses to end. German officials in Königsberg gave contradictory accounts. Some claimed the panels had been destroyed in an Allied bombing raid in August 1944. Others claimed they had been crated again and moved before the raid, transported by truck or train to an unknown location. Soviet investigators who entered Königsberg in 1945 found only charred fragments, consistent with fire damage, but insufficient to confirm total destruction. The search that followed spanned decades. Investigators excavated tunnels beneath Königsberg Castle. They searched mines in Thuringia and salt caverns in Austria. They followed tips from deathbed confessions, found diaries, and anonymous letters. At least 2 men who claimed to know the Amber Room's location died before they could reveal it. One was shot, one drowned under circumstances that have never been fully explained. In 1997, a German investigator located one panel, a single mosaic of Florentine stone, in the possession of a German family. The family claimed it had been in their home since the war. The panel was authenticated. It was returned to Russia. It stands today in the reconstructed Amber Room, a replica completed in 2003. As the only confirmed piece of the original to have survived, the rest remains missing. The most widely held scholarly opinion today is that the original panels were likely destroyed, burned in Königsberg during the Soviet assault of 1945, or bombed in the Allied raids of 1944. But this conclusion is impossible to confirm because the physical evidence is too fragmentary to be definitive. And so the searches continue. Ground-penetrating radar has been deployed in forests across eastern Germany. Diving teams have explored wrecks in the Baltic Sea. As recently as 2023, German treasure hunters announced they believed they had located the entrance to a tunnel network in eastern Germany that might contain wartime caches, the Amber Room among them. Nothing has been found. Nothing conclusive has ever been ruled out. 6 tons of amber, worth an estimated $500 million by modern estimates, have been missing for 80 years. And the most dazzling room ever built by human hands remains to this day unaccounted for. April 30th, 1945. The Reich Chancellery is burning. Soviet shells are falling on central Berlin. Adolf Hitler is dead. In the chaos that follows, the inner circle of the Nazi leadership attempts to escape. Most fail. Goering surrenders. Himmler is captured and takes poison. Goebbels dies in the bunker. The senior leadership of the Third Reich is either dead or in Allied custody within days. Except for one man. Martin Bormann was Hitler's personal secretary, arguably one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. He controlled access to Hitler. He shaped policy. He managed the Nazi Party's finances and, according to post-war investigators, oversaw the systematic transfer of vast quantities of looted wealth out of Germany in the final years of the war. If anyone in the Nazi leadership possessed both the means and the motive to disappear, it was Bormann. On the night of May 1st, 1945, Bormann was last seen attempting to break out of the Berlin encirclement alongside several other Nazi officials. Multiple eyewitnesses, people who were present that night, gave accounts that contradicted one another on almost every point. Some said he was shot. Some said he was killed by a tank explosion. Some said they saw him after the explosion, still moving, still alive. He was tried in absentia at Nuremberg and sentenced to death. For the next quarter century, Bormann remained the most wanted man on Earth. Alleged sightings came from Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, Chile, Spain, and Egypt. Simon Wiesenthal, the famous Nazi hunter, insisted for years that Bormann was alive. Ladislas Farago, a journalist, published a book in 1974 claiming to have tracked Bormann to South America with documentary evidence. Evidence that was later largely discredited, but never fully refuted. In 1972, construction workers in West Berlin unearthed 2 skeletons near the Lehrter rail station, the area through which Bormann's breakout had passed. Forensic examination suggested one skeleton matched Bormann's dental records. West German authorities declared him dead. But the analysis relied on pre-war dental records of uncertain provenance, and not everyone accepted the conclusion. In 1998, DNA testing was conducted on the remains. The results confirmed a familial match with Bormann's descendants. The official German determination stands. Bormann died in Berlin in early May 1945, likely from a cyanide capsule he carried for exactly this eventuality. And yet the questions persist. Why did so many witnesses insist they saw him alive after the explosion? Why were his remains not found for 27 years in a location that had been searched multiple times? Why did the network of Nazi sympathizers in South America, which demonstrably helped hundreds of other war criminals escape, apparently make no provision for the one man most capable of financing it? The DNA evidence is the strongest argument for closure, but it is not absolute. And Bormann's role in the movement of Nazi wealth, billions of dollars in gold, currency, and art, remains largely undocumented. Some of that wealth has never been found either. Perhaps the most uncomfortable possibility is this, that Bormann died in Berlin, as the evidence suggests, but that the machinery he set in motion before his death continued to operate without him, funneling Nazi assets into the post-war world through channels that have never been fully mapped. That machinery, those channels, that wealth, they are the real mystery that Bormann left behind. May 10th, 1941. A Messerschmitt Bf 110 takes off from an airfield near Augsburg, Germany. Its pilot is one of the most recognizable men in the world. He is the Deputy Führer of the Third Reich. He is Rudolf Hess. He flies alone at night across the North Sea. He bails out over Scotland and parachutes into a farmer's field. He is captured by a farmhand with a pitchfork. And to this day, no one has satisfactorily explained why. The official explanation, the one Hess himself gave, and the one that Hitler's government quickly endorsed after the mission's failure, is that Hess acted alone. That he was a well-meaning but deluded idealist who believed he could personally negotiate a peace between Britain and Germany. That Hitler was furious at his departure, called him mentally ill, and stripped him of all positions. It is a tidy explanation. It is also riddled with implausibilities. Rudolf Hess did not simply steal a plane. He had been preparing for the flight for months. He had made at least 3 previous attempts. He had obtained secret navigational charts. He had the aircraft modified to extend its fuel range. He carried with him a list of specific British aristocrats he intended to contact, including the Duke of Hamilton, whom he believed to be sympathetic to a negotiated peace. None of this is consistent with an impulsive, unsanctioned act of a mentally unstable man. The British government's response added another layer of opacity. Hess was taken into military custody immediately, interrogated extensively, and then, in a decision that has never been adequately explained, classified as a prisoner of war and held in complete isolation. Churchill refused to allow him to communicate with anyone. The transcripts of his interrogations were classified for decades. What did Hess tell his British interrogators? What proposals did he carry? Some historians believe he arrived with a genuine peace offer, terms that would have allowed Germany to retain its continental conquests in exchange for British neutrality. Others believe he was part of a larger deception operation. Still others have suggested, controversially, that the man who landed in Scotland was not Rudolf Hess at all, a theory unsupported by evidence but persistent nonetheless. What is documented is this. Hess remained in British custody for the rest of the war, then in Spandau prison in Berlin until 1987, when he died at the age of 93. He was the last prisoner in Spandau, a fortress maintained by 4 nations at enormous expense to hold a single elderly man. Why? What did the Allied powers fear he might say if released? Hess himself, in his final years, became increasingly insistent that he had not acted alone. He claimed his mission had been authorized, that he had been promised British contacts who would facilitate negotiations, and that he had been betrayed. He died before elaborating further. Many Hess-related files were scheduled for declassification by 2017, though some material remains withheld. The most famous solo flight of the Second World War, and its purpose, its true purpose, remains officially unknown. The question has haunted physicists and historians for 80 years. How close did Nazi Germany come to building an atomic bomb? The standard narrative, widely accepted and endlessly repeated, holds that the German nuclear program was a relative failure, that it was underfunded, poorly coordinated, and, crucially, led in the wrong direction by Werner Heisenberg, Germany's preeminent physicist, who miscalculated the amount of fissile material needed to achieve a critical chain reaction. The United States, by contrast, assembled the Manhattan Project, a coordinated effort involving 130,000 workers, $2 billion, and the greatest concentration of scientific talent in human history. The result was the bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. The mystery is not that the Americans succeeded. The mystery is the degree to which the Germans failed. and whether the failure was as complete as official history suggests. In December 1938, German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann first achieved nuclear fission in a Berlin laboratory. Germany had the scientific capability. It had uranium mines in occupied Czechoslovakia. It had a heavy water production facility in occupied Norway, the same facility that Allied commandos and bombers worked desperately to destroy in one of the war's most daring operations. Because heavy water is essential to one method of achieving a sustained nuclear reaction. Why would the Allies risk so much to destroy a facility that was, according to the standard narrative, part of a program that was already going nowhere? The farm hall transcripts provide the most unsettling evidence. In 1945, 10 German nuclear scientists, including Heisenberg, were captured and held at Farm Hall, an English country house. Unknown to the scientists, every room was bugged. Their conversations were recorded continuously. When they were told of the Hiroshima bombing, their reactions were captured in full. What those transcripts reveal is a group of scientists who were simultaneously shocked by the bomb's existence and engaged in rapid, sophisticated discussion of the physics involved. Heisenberg, within hours of hearing the news, had worked through the correct calculation for critical mass, the same calculation he had allegedly gotten wrong throughout the war. This has led some physicists and historians to argue that Heisenberg knew the correct answer all along and deliberately provided his Nazi patrons with the wrong one, that he was, in effect, sabotaging Germany's bomb program from within. Heisenberg denied this for the rest of his life. He maintained he had simply made a mistake. His surviving colleagues were divided. What is certain is that the German program came close enough to frighten the Allies into extreme action. Operation Alsos, a dedicated Allied mission to capture German nuclear scientists and materials before the Soviets could, operated throughout 1944 and 1945 with urgent priority. The men running it were terrified of what they might find. They found, in the end, an experimental reactor in a cave in southern Germany. Not yet operational, but architecturally sophisticated. They found enriched uranium stocks. They found documentation of research that was further advanced than the official narrative had ever acknowledged. How close was Germany to the bomb? The honest answer, the answer that the evidence supports, is closer than comfortable. Not close enough to win, but not as far as was claimed. And the full scope of what was destroyed, captured, or quietly absorbed into Allied programs after the war, that remains in its details unresolved. The war ended in May 1945. The Nuremberg trials began in November. Justice, however partial, was being administered. And simultaneously, across Europe, a parallel infrastructure was quietly moving hundreds of Nazi war criminals, men with blood on their hands, to safety. The escape routes became known as the ratlines. They ran primarily to South America, to Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Paraguay, but also to the Middle East and to Spain. They used forged documents, false identities, and the infrastructure of international organizations that had not yet been fully scrutinized in the chaos of the post-war world. The most deeply controversial element of the ratlines is the alleged involvement of elements within the Catholic Church. Specifically, the role of Bishop Alois Hudal, an Austrian clergyman based in Rome who was known for his sympathies toward National Socialism. Hudal operated a network that provided sanctuary, identity documents, and travel assistance to fleeing Nazis. He later admitted this openly in his memoirs, without apparent remorse. Less certain is the extent to which Hudal operated with or without the knowledge of the Vatican itself. Pope Pius XII, already a deeply controversial figure for his silence during the Holocaust, has been accused by some historians of providing institutional cover for the ratlines, whether through action or willful inaction. The Vatican has denied systematic involvement. Its wartime archives, partially opened in recent years, have produced evidence that is suggestive but not conclusive. What is documented beyond doubt is that the ratlines worked. Adolf Eichmann, the bureaucratic architect of the Holocaust, reached Argentina in 1950 using a Red Cross passport obtained in Rome. Franz Stangl, commandant of the Treblinka death camp, where approximately 900,000 people were murdered, also reached Argentina via Rome. Josef Mengele, who conducted sadistic medical experiments on prisoners at Auschwitz, settled in Argentina and later Brazil, where he died in 1979 without ever facing trial. Klaus Barbie, the Gestapo chief of Lyon, responsible for the torture and murder of thousands of French civilians, was actually employed by American intelligence after the war, then helped to escape to Bolivia when his past became inconvenient. This brings the second, equally disturbing dimension of the ratlines, the role of Allied intelligence agencies, particularly the American and British services, in facilitating the escape of certain war criminals they considered useful in the emerging Cold War against the Soviet Union. Operation Paperclip, officially declassified, brought more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and intelligence operatives to the United States after the war. Some were guilty of serious crimes. Werner von Braun, who led the development of the V-2 rocket using slave labor, became the head of NASA's rocket program. Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's chief of intelligence on the Eastern Front, was recruited by American intelligence and went on to head West Germany's post-war intelligence service. How many others escaped through channels that have never been officially acknowledged? How many war crimes were effectively pardoned in exchange for Cold War utility? Those files, the ones that would provide a full accounting, remain classified in multiple countries. Some will not be released for decades. Some may never be. The ratlines were real. Their full extent is not. July 4th, 1943. A Liberator aircraft takes off from Gibraltar with 16 people on board. Among them is General Władysław Sikorski, Prime Minister of the Polish government in exile and commander of all Polish armed forces, fighting alongside the Allies. He is the most important Polish political figure in the world. 16 seconds after takeoff, the aircraft crashes into the sea. 14 of the 16 people on board are killed. Sikorski is among the dead. The sole survivor is the Czech pilot, Edward Puchal. He is found floating in the water, wearing a life jacket. The British military inquiry concluded the crash was an accident, caused by the jamming of the aircraft's elevator controls. No evidence of sabotage was found. The case was officially closed. It has never been satisfactorily explained. The timing alone raises questions that the accident theory struggles to answer. Sikorski had been an increasing source of political friction for both the British and the Soviets. In April 1943, he had formally requested that the International Red Cross investigate the Katyn massacre, the murder of approximately 22,000 Polish military officers, police, and intellectuals by the Soviet secret police in 1940. The Soviets, who had carried out the massacre, were now Allied partners indispensable to the war effort. Stalin responded to Sikorski's request by severing diplomatic relations with the Polish government in exile. Churchill, desperate to maintain the Allied coalition, pressured Sikorski to drop the matter. Sikorski refused. He was determined to hold Stalin accountable, regardless of the diplomatic cost. 3 months later, he was dead. The beneficiaries of his death were obvious: the Soviet Union, which no longer faced its most vocal accuser in the Allied camp, and the British government, which no longer had to manage an intractable political problem. Soviet intelligence documents, partially released after the Cold War, have not provided definitive proof of Soviet involvement, but have also not exculpated Soviet intelligence, which was aggressively active in Gibraltar at the time. A separate theory points to British intelligence, specifically to the possibility that Kim Philby, the senior MI6 officer, who was later exposed as a Soviet double agent, may have been involved. Philby was head of MI6's Iberian section, which covered Gibraltar at the time of the crash. He denied any involvement. He would have had both means and motive, serving his Soviet masters. Playwright Rolf Hochhuth dramatized the assassination theory in his 1967 play Soldiers, triggering a legal and political firestorm in Britain. The controversy was intense enough that the play was initially banned from the London stage. In 2008, Sikorski's body was exhumed in Poland. Forensic examination confirmed that his injuries were consistent with a high-impact crash. No evidence of pre-crash trauma was found. Polish authorities announced the results were inconclusive regarding the cause of the crash itself. The documents that might resolve the question, held in British intelligence archives, remain classified. Requests for their release have been denied on national security grounds more than 80 years after the event. An accident that killed the Allies' most inconvenient ally at the most convenient possible moment. The evidence for sabotage is circumstantial. The evidence against it is incomplete. The question of what really happened over the waters of Gibraltar on July 4, 1943 has no answer. Only the right questions and the wrong silence. Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazi regime conducted the most systematic organized theft in human history. It began with the dispossession of Jewish Germans, their businesses seized, their bank accounts frozen, their property confiscated through legislation. It expanded as the Wehrmacht swept across Europe, consuming the national gold reserves of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway. It deepened further as the SS stripped the concentration camps, collecting not just currency and jewelry, but the gold fillings extracted from the teeth of the dead. By the end of the war, the total value of what the Nazis had stolen in gold, currency, art, and other assets is estimated to have run to several $100 billion in modern terms. Much of it has been accounted for. Most of the national gold reserves were eventually recovered or compensated. Major artworks have been gradually repatriated over the decades, but some of it, perhaps the most deliberately concealed portion, has never been found. The most enduring mystery centers on the so-called Reichsbank treasure. In the final weeks of the war, the contents of the Reichsbank in Berlin, including gold bars, foreign currency, and bags of gold coins, were loaded onto trucks and trains and moved south toward the Austrian Alps, ahead of the advancing Allied armies. Some of this treasure reached its intended destination at Merkers, a salt mine in Thuringia, where American forces discovered it in April 1945. 250 tons of gold, along with paintings and personal valuables, stripped from concentration camp prisoners. General Patton, who visited the discovery, described the scene in his diary with characteristic bluntness. But other convoys are not fully accounted for. A train carrying a portion of the Reichsbank assets is documented as having traveled south from Berlin in early 1945. Its documented destination was never reached. Its documented cargo was never recovered. The most famous specific legend is the Gold Train, a Hungarian train loaded with the confiscated property of Hungarian Jews, including gold, jewels, and artworks of extraordinary value. This train was captured by American forces in Austria in May 1945. Much of what it contained was misappropriated by American soldiers and officers, eventually recovered in part, and the subject of decades of legal proceedings. Hungary and Jewish survivor organizations have pursued compensation and restitution for years. The full accounting of what was on that train and where it all went has never been completed. There are also the assets that were moved outside Europe entirely. Martin Bormann, as noted earlier, oversaw what German records describe as Operation Eagle Flight. an effort to move Nazi capital into foreign banks and foreign businesses before the Reich's collapse. Historians have traced some of these transactions through Swiss, Spanish, and Argentine banking records. The total remains unquantified. What is certain is this: the Nazi regime stole on an industrial scale, and the full reckoning of that theft has never been completed. Dozens of lawsuits in American, European, and Israeli courts, stretching from the 1990s to the present day, continue to seek restitution for assets that changed hands under Nazi rule. The gold bars in the salt mines were found. The art on the walls of the museums has been identified. But somewhere beneath 80 years of legal complexity, false documentation, and deliberate concealment, a portion of what was stolen from Europe's Jews has never been returned, because it has never been found. December 1946. The Second World War has been over for 16 months. The Allied powers are demobilizing. Economies are rebuilding. The world is exhausted. The United States Navy launches its largest Antarctic expedition in history. Operation High Jump was commanded by Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, a celebrated polar explorer and veteran of multiple Antarctic expeditions. It involved 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier and multiple submarines. It carried 4,700 men. Its stated purpose was scientific research, mapping Antarctic coastlines, testing equipment in extreme cold weather conditions, establishing the extent of American territorial claims. It lasted less than half its planned duration. The official explanation was weather. The expedition returned to the United States in February 1947, months ahead of schedule. And the mystery begins in what was reported and what was not. A Chilean newspaper published an interview with Admiral Byrd in March 1947, in which he allegedly described encountering hostile aircraft that could fly from pole to pole with tremendous speed. The interview has been cited endlessly in alternative history circles as evidence that Nazi Germany had established a secret base in Antarctica, and Neuschwabenland, during the war, equipped with advanced technology, possibly including flying saucer-type craft. This theory is almost certainly fiction. It draws on genuine historical elements. The Nazis did conduct a 1938-39 expedition to Antarctica, and they did claim a sector of the territory they named Neuschwabenland, but extrapolates from these facts into the realm of speculation without credible evidence. The genuine mystery of Operation High Jump is more prosaic but more interesting. Why was such an enormous military force deployed to Antarctica in 1946, and why did it return early? Some historians have proposed that the expedition's real purpose was strategic assessment, determining whether Antarctica could serve as a location for nuclear testing or mapping it for Cold War territorial purposes before the Soviet Union could stake claims. Others have suggested that the Navy was genuinely searching for German submarine bases, following credible wartime intelligence that suggested German U-boats had explored Antarctic waters. At least 2 German U-boats, U-530 and U-977, surrendered in Argentina in mid-1945, months after the German capitulation, with crews who gave implausible explanations for their delayed surrender. What were those submarines doing for those extra weeks? Where had they been? The classified documents from Operation High Jump remain, in significant part, inaccessible. What scientific data was gathered has been published. What tactical intelligence was gathered has not. The Antarctic submarine base theory is almost certainly myth. But the question of what the Navy was genuinely looking for, and what, if anything, it found, remains without a definitive public answer. June 6, 1944. The largest amphibious assault in history. 156,000 Allied troops crossing the English Channel to storm the beaches of Normandy, the operation that would decide the war in the West. It was also supposed to be a surprise. The Allies had spent months constructing Operation Fortitude. an elaborate deception designed to convince the Germans that the real invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. They created a fictional army group, complete with fake radio traffic under the nominal command of General George Patton. They fed false intelligence to German agents who had been turned and were operating under British control. They convinced the Germans, persuasively and completely, that Normandy would be a feint. And yet there are documented anomalies in the German response on June 6th that have never been fully explained. The most significant involves the 352nd Infantry Division, a battle-hardened German unit that was positioned by historical accident or by design directly in front of Omaha Beach, the sector where American casualties were highest and the landing came closest to failure. The 352nd was not supposed to be there. Allied intelligence had placed it further inland, conducting training exercises. It was at the beach on D-Day. Why? Its movement to the beach had occurred just days before the invasion. The official explanation is coincidence, a scheduled exercise that happened to place the division in the most critical location at the most critical moment. That coincidence has always troubled military historians. A separate anomaly involves the German command structure on the night of June 5th. Field Marshal Rommel, who commanded the forces defending the Normandy coast, was absent. He had traveled to Germany to visit his wife for her birthday and was caught off guard by the timing of the invasion. His superior, Field Marshal von Rundstedt, requested the release of the Panzer reserves to counterattack the landing beaches. The request was refused for hours. The reserves were held back. The reason given was that Hitler was asleep and could not be disturbed. By the time he was woken and the panzers released, the Allied beachhead was established. The most critical hours had passed. How much of this was Allied deception working perfectly? How much was German command dysfunction? And is there evidence, as some historians have suggested, that agents within the German High Command deliberately delayed or distorted communications on June 6th? The answer touches on one of the war's deepest intelligence secrets, the identity and extent of anti-Nazi elements within the Wehrmacht's officer corps, who may have been, in some measure, cooperating with Allied success. The July 20th bomb plot against Hitler just 6 weeks later demonstrated that such elements existed and were more organized than previously known. Whether they acted on June 6th, whether the coincidences of D-Day were anything other than coincidences, is a question the existing documentation does not resolve. The beach was taken. The war was won. But the precise mechanics of how the German defense failed at its most critical moment remain, in their details, uncertain. The Nuremberg trials established the principle that crimes against humanity would be prosecuted, regardless of the rank or nationality of those who committed them. It was not a principle that was applied universally. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research unit of the Imperial Japanese Army operating in Japanese-occupied China from 1937 to 1945. Under the command of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 conducted human experimentation on a scale that historians estimate involved at least 3,000 deaths, possibly many more. Prisoners, primarily Chinese, Korean, and Soviet civilians and soldiers, as well as some Western prisoners of war, were subjected to experiments involving plague, cholera, anthrax, frostbite, vivisection, pressure chambers, and weapons testing. The facility was designed for systematic research. It was not gratuitous cruelty for its own sake. It was organized, methodical, and scientifically documented. That documentation, thousands of pages of data on human responses to biological agents and extreme physical conditions, represented information that could not be ethically replicated and that had direct military application. In 1945, as Soviet forces advanced into Manchuria, the Unit 731 complex was destroyed and its records removed. Ishi and his senior officers dispersed into civilian life. The prisoners who remained were killed to prevent witness testimony. What happened next has been described by historians as one of the most morally compromised decisions of the post-war period. American military investigators, aware of Unit 731's activities, made a calculation. The biological warfare data Ishi possessed was of significant strategic value, particularly as the Cold War was beginning and the Soviet Union was developing its own biological weapons program. A prosecution of Ishi and his officers at a Nuremberg-style trial would require the data to be submitted as evidence, making it available to everyone, including the Soviets. An alternative was proposed: immunity from prosecution in exchange for the data. Ishi and his senior colleagues accepted. Shiro Ishi, a man responsible for the deaths of thousands in medical experiments of extraordinary cruelty, lived in Tokyo until 1959. He died of throat cancer, never having faced trial, never having been publicly held accountable. The data his unit produced was absorbed into American biological warfare research programs. The full extent of that research, what was learned, how it was used, what influence it had on American biological weapons development, remains classified. What is not classified is the moral bargain that was struck. It was deliberate. It was documented. It was approved at the highest levels of the American occupation government in Japan. The men who designed the experiments at Nuremberg went to prison. The men who designed the experiments in Manchuria went home. That disparity, that deliberate, calculated disparity, is not a mystery of evidence. It is a mystery of conscience, and it has never been adequately explained. April 30th, 1945. Berlin is encircled. Soviet forces are less than 500 meters from the Reich Chancellery. In a concrete bunker beneath the garden, Adolf Hitler marries Eva Braun, eats lunch with his secretaries and bids farewell to his staff. Then, according to the official account, he enters his private study. He bites down on a cyanide capsule. He fires a pistol into his right temple. He dies. His body and Eva Braun's are carried to the garden above, doused with petrol, and burned. Soviet forces arrive within hours. They find the charred remains. Later identification is made, and that is where the certainty ends. The Soviet investigation in 1945 was conducted by SMERSH, Soviet Military Counterintelligence. Their initial forensic examination was limited. The remains were buried, exhumed, reburied, moved multiple times, and subjected to contradictory documentation. Stalin himself, in a 1945 meeting with American officials, expressed doubt that Hitler was dead. Soviet authorities gave conflicting accounts to Allied investigators for years. The skull fragment with a bullet hole, which the Soviets claimed was Hitler's, was displayed in a Moscow archive as the definitive physical evidence of his death. In 2018, researchers from the University of Strasbourg were allowed to examine it. Their analysis determined that the skull belonged to a woman under 40 years of age. It was not Hitler's skull. The Soviets had known this for decades, or had at least had the means to know it. They had never disclosed it. What did happen in that bunker? The eyewitness testimony of those present, Hitler's secretaries, his adjutants, the SS guards, is largely consistent. They heard a gunshot. They entered the room and found the bodies. They carried them to the garden. Their accounts have been tested by multiple historical investigations and found to be generally credible. The most rigorous modern examination of the evidence by historians including Ian Kershaw and the forensic work published in the European Journal of Internal Medicine in 2018, which analyzed Hitler's actual teeth from Soviet archives, confirms that the dental records match. Hitler's teeth, preserved in Soviet archives and authenticated against pre-war dental records, are consistent with identification. The conclusion supported by the best available evidence is that Hitler died in the bunker on April 30th, 1945. The skull fragment was not his, but his dental remains appear to be genuine. And yet the escape theory has never entirely disappeared. The FBI maintained an active file on possible Hitler sightings until 1947. Declassified Argentinian intelligence documents released in 2017 contain reports of German submarine activity and the alleged arrival of high-ranking Nazi fugitives in Patagonia in 1945. A book published in 2011 by a former American investigative journalist claimed, on the basis of FBI documents and Argentinian sources, to have evidence that Hitler survived. The evidence examined by serious historians does not support these claims. The dental evidence, in particular, is considered highly reliable by forensic specialists. But the Soviet deception, the false skull fragment, the decades of deliberate obfuscation, created a permanent gap in the evidentiary record. They muddied the waters so thoroughly that clean certainty became impossible. Hitler died in the bunker. The best evidence says so. But the Soviets lied about it for decades, and everything that comes after a lie, even a lie that happens to surround a true conclusion, carries the shadow of doubt. That shadow has never fully lifted. It is the final mystery of a man who built his power on lies and whose death, even in the historical record, was contaminated by them. September 2nd, 1945. Japan formally surrenders aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. The Second World War is over. 80 years have passed since that ceremony. The combatant nations have reconciled. The survivors have aged and died. The archives have been opened, most of them. The evidence has been examined, most of it. And 12 questions remain. Why did the Panzers stop at Dunkirk? Where is the Amber Room? Did Bormann escape? What did Hess carry to Scotland? How close were the Germans to the bomb? How many war criminals escaped through the ratlines, and who helped them? Who killed Sikorsky, if anyone? Where did the gold go? What was the Navy looking for in Antarctica? Who delayed the German response on D-Day? Why did Unit 731's commanders walk free? And what exactly happened in that Berlin bunker? These questions are not equivalent in their weight or their resolution. Some, the death of Hitler, the Nazi atomic program, have answers that most historians accept, even if they remain incomplete. Others, the Amber Room, the Nazi gold, the ratlines, involve physical mysteries that may never be resolved because the evidence was destroyed or deliberately concealed. But they share something important. They are all products of the same phenomenon, the deliberate manufacture of uncertainty, by governments, intelligence agencies, and individuals who had reasons to obscure the truth. Some of that obscuration was strategic, some was self-protective, some was simply the collateral damage of war. Records lost, witnesses killed, evidence burned. The result is a historical record with deliberate gaps. Gaps that have been filled over the decades with speculation, mythology, and sometimes outright fabrication. The escape theories, the treasure legends, the secret technology rumors, they flourish in exactly the spaces where documentation runs out. What the serious historical investigation of these mysteries reveals is not hidden truth. It reveals the nature of institutional power, how governments protect themselves, how intelligence agencies operate outside accountability, how the calculation of strategic interest consistently overrides the demands of justice. Unit 731 is the clearest example. There was no mystery about what happened. The mystery was the decision, documented, deliberate, approved, to let it pass without consequence. That decision tells us something about the post-war world that no amount of archival research can change, because it was not an accident. It was a choice. The same is true of the ratlines. Hundreds of war criminals escaped. Some were helped by organizations that have never faced institutional accountability. Some were helped by governments that have never fully disclosed the extent of their involvement. The files that would complete that accounting remain classified in some cases for reasons that continue to serve institutional interests that have nothing to do with historical truth. These mysteries are not just historical curiosities. They are active questions about accountability, justice, and the relationship between governments and the truth. They matter not because solving them would change the outcome of a war that ended in 1945, but because the habits of concealment they represent did not end in 1945. The agencies that buried those files continue to operate. The institutions that made those calculations continue to make them. In 1948, the philosopher George Santayana's most famous observation was already old. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But there is a prior problem that Santayana did not fully address. You cannot remember what you were never told. You cannot learn from a history that has been systematically edited. You cannot hold power accountable when the evidence of its conduct has been locked away on national security grounds and released, if at all, only when those responsible are safely dead. The amber room may be ashes. The gold may be irretrievable. Martin Bormann almost certainly died in a Berlin street in May 1945. But the documents that would resolve the questions about the ratlines are not ash. The files on Unit 731's data transaction are not irretrievable. The classified records of Rudolf Hess's interrogations are not lost. They are locked. There is a difference. 80 years after the end of the most destructive conflict in human history, the full accounting of what happened, of what choices were made, what crimes were pardoned, what truths were buried, has not been completed. The war is over, the reckoning is not, and until it is, the questions will remain. Because they are not really questions about the past, they are questions about who we decided to be, and whether we have yet been honest about the answer. If this story moved you, challenged you, or helped you see the Second World War differently, it would be an honor to have you join our growing community. Subscribing isn't just a click. It's a way to support more powerful stories, more forgotten voices, and more truth from the past. So if you believe these stories matter, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep building this journey together. And don't forget to leave a comment. We read everyone and love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, keep exploring history with Epic War. Keep asking questions. Keep seeking the truth.